Imagine this. You wake up in the same bed, to the same light, seeping through the same cracked blinds, your body heavy with the fatigue that sleep never dissolves. The alarm blares, not because you need it, but because you've trained yourself to believe you're lazy without it. You silence it with a groan, not of protest, but of resignation. This is not the cry of someone trapped. It's the sigh of someone who has stopped noticing the bars. You drag yourself to the bathroom, catch a glimpse in the mirror-dark circles, like ink stains beneath your eyes, jaw clenched so tightly it aches. You don't smile. You don't frown. You just look, as if trying to recognize a stranger wearing your face. And then, without thinking, you run the water, splash your face, and mutter the same silent mantra. Just get through today. But here is the unsettling truth you don't speak aloud. You've said that every day for years. Just get through. Not enjoy, not create, not live, just get through. As if life is a prison sentence, and survival is the only victory worth claiming. Now ask yourself, why do you keep returning to the pain? Not the dramatic, catastrophic kind, the kind that breaks bones or ends relationships, but the quiet, chronic ache. The late-night arguments you know will go nowhere. The job that drains you but feels safe. The relationship that feels more like an obligation than a connection. The self-criticism that plays on loop louder than any song you love. You say you want peace. You say you crave joy. You scroll through images of mountain retreats, laughter-filled dinners, sunsets on distant shores proof. You think of what you desire. And yet, when peace knocks at your door, you hesitate. When joy offers its hand, you pull away. Instead, you return again and again to the familiar sting of struggle, to the comfort of discomfort. Why? Why do you punish yourself with overwork, then complain of exhaustion? Why do you stay in conversations that leave you hollow, just to avoid the silence that might force you to confront what you truly feel? Why do you romanticize burnout as passion and suffering as meaning? You tell yourself it's necessary. That pain is the price of growth. That no one gets a free pass. That if it were easy, everyone would do it. But somewhere beneath the logic, there's a whisper. What if you're not enduring suffering to escape it, but to keep it alive? What if your suffering isn't an accident? What if it's a choice so deeply buried, so masterfully disguised, that you don't even recognize it as one? You flinch at the thought. Of course you do. To suggest that you choose your pain is to accuse you of self-sabotage, of madness. But consider this. You don't choose the initial wound, the neglect, the rejection, the loss. No, but you do choose, moment after moment, to return to the echo of it. You choose the stories that replay it, the relationships that reenact it, the thoughts that resurrect it. And in that repetition, something insidious takes root. A dependency. Not on pain itself, but on what pain provides. Identity, purpose, excuse, control, certainty. Suffering becomes your compass. It tells you who you are. The one who struggles, the one who endures, the one who tries. It shields you from the terrifying question, who would you be if you weren't fighting? You've built your life around resistance. You measure your worth in battles fought, not in peace achieved. You wear your fatigue like a medal, your anxiety a badge of depth, your insomnia proof of your seriousness. To let go of suffering feels like losing yourself. But here is the paradox. The very thing you believe gives you meaning may be the thing stealing it. You cling to pain because it feels real. And in a world of illusions, social media perfection, hollow productivity, performative happiness, pain is undeniable. It doesn't lie. It doesn't pretend. It grounds you. It says, I am here. I am alive. I am not deluding myself. And so, you confuse intensity with authenticity. You believe that if it doesn't hurt, it isn't true. But what if that's the oldest lie the mind tells itself? What if the deepest truth isn't found in the wound, but in the space around it? What if healing isn't a betrayal of your past, but a fulfillment of it? You've been taught that healing means fixing, patching the cracks, silencing the pain, returning to normal. But what if healing isn't about returning at all? What if it's about leaving behind the identity forged in fire, stepping out of the role of the wounded, and daring to ask, what if I don't have to suffer to be significant? The thought terrifies you, not because it's impossible, but because it's possible. Because if it's possible, then everything changes. Then the excuses crumble. Then the stories lose their power. Then you are no longer a victim of life, but its author. And that is the most dangerous idea of all. Because to admit you've been addicted to suffering is to admit you've had a choice all along. And with that admission comes responsibility, the kind that cannot be outsourced, numbed, or postponed. So the real question isn't why are you suffering? It's why aren't you stopping? And the answer to that question, buried beneath years of justification, fear, and unconscious loyalty to the past, is the key to a freedom so profound, so disorienting, that most would rather stay in chains than face it. But you right now, reading these words, you've felt the tremor beneath your feet. The ground is shifting. Something is coming. The only question is, will you run back to the familiar pain, or will you stand and meet what waits on the other side? The journey begins not with a solution, but with a single unbearable realization. You are not suffering because you must. You are suffering because, in some hidden corner of your soul, you believe you should. And that belief, unseen, unquestioned, unchallenged, has become the architect of your life. Now, the next question writes itself. Where did that belief come from? And more importantly, who benefits from it? You once believed pain was your teacher. Now you must consider the possibility that it has been your jailer. The belief that suffering is necessary, that it must be endured, earned, even welcomed, is not a personal flaw. It is not a quirk of your psychology, nor merely the residue of a difficult childhood. It is a deeply embedded script, written over centuries, reinforced by culture, religion, philosophy, and the very architecture of the mind. This script does not merely describe suffering, it sanctifies it. It tells you that meaning is forged in fire, that virtue is proven through endurance, that the soul is purified only in the crucible of struggle. But what if this story has been weaponized? What if the narrative of redemptive suffering has been used consciously and unconsciously to keep you docile, distracted, and obedient? Look at the myths you were raised on. The hero who must suffer before triumphing. A saint who finds God only through agony. The artist who creates masterpieces in the grip of despair. The entrepreneur who pays their dues in sleepless nights and broken relationships. These are not neutral archetypes. They are psychological traps disguised as inspiration. They condition you to believe that without suffering, there can be no greatness, no truth, no authenticity. And so, you internalize the equation. Suffering equals significance. This is not an accident. It is a mechanism of control, both internal and external. Societies have long relied on the glorification of suffering to maintain order. The peasant suffers for the kingdom. The worker suffers for the economy. The woman suffers for motherhood. The man suffers in silence for honor. Each is promised a future reward, salvation, success, respect, love. But the reward is always deferred, always conditional, always just beyond reach. In this way, suffering becomes a currency. You pay in pain today for a happiness that never arrives. And because the payment is ongoing, the system remains intact. You stay in the job that kills your spirit. You tolerate the partner who drains your light. You chase goals that leave you emptier with every achievement. All because you believe deep in your bones that this is how it must be. But who planted that belief? Carl Jung would say it lives in the shadow, the unconscious part of the psyche where repressed pain, fear, and forbidden desires accumulate. The shadow does not seek healing. It seeks repetition. It compels you to reenact old wounds because familiarity feels safer than freedom. To the shadow, suffering is not a problem to be solved, but an identity to be preserved. I am the one who suffers. That role is known, predictable, secure. To abandon it is to step into the unknown, and the psyche would rather endure hell than face the terror of emptiness. Then there is Nietzsche, who saw through the facade. He called out resentment, the quiet vengeance of the powerless, who invert values to make their weakness a virtue. The weak call themselves humble, the oppressed call themselves chosen. The suffering call themselves deep. In doing so, they gain moral superiority. They transform their chains into crowns. But Nietzsche warned, this is not liberation. It is revenge disguised as virtue. And it keeps you chained to the very condition you claim to despise. Schopenhauer went further. He declared that life, at its core, is will a blind, ceaseless striving. And because desire can never be fully satisfied, existence is inherently painful. The best one can hope for, he argued, is temporary relief through art, asceticism, or resignation. This philosophy does not offer escape, it offers surrender. And in its wake, it leaves a quiet acceptance of suffering as inevitable. Not just inevitable, fundamental. But perhaps the most insidious influence comes not from philosophers, but from the silent machinery of modern life. Aldous Huxley foresaw a world not of brute oppression, but of pleasurable servitude where people are pacified, not by pain, but by distraction, comfort, and the illusion of choice. Yet in our era, a darker hybrid has emerged. We are both distracted and tormented. We scroll endlessly to numb the ache, only to return to the grind with renewed guilt. We consume self-help content, promising peace, while structuring our lives around stress. We claim to want balance, but measure our days by productivity. Jean-Paul Sartre saw the core issue, bad faith, the lie we tell ourselves to avoid freedom. We say, I have no choice, when in truth, we are afraid of the responsibility that choice brings. To admit that you could walk away from your job, your relationship, your self-image, that you could stop suffering, is to admit that you have been complicit in your own imprisonment. And that truth is unbearable. So the mind creates a fortress of justification. I suffer because I care, because I'm sensitive, because I'm trying to be better. These are not insights, they are alibis. They allow you to remain in the prison while believing you are fighting to escape. Viktor Frankl, writing from the ashes of Auschwitz, claimed that meaning could be found even in the worst suffering. And he was right. But somewhere along the way, his insight was twisted. It became, you must suffer to find meaning. As if meaning cannot exist without pain. As if joy is shallow. As if peace is complacency. But Frankl never said suffering was necessary. He said meaning was possible, even in suffering. There is a universe of difference. Now consider the neurological dimension. Your brain is wired for threat detection. It remembers pain more vividly than pleasure. It clings to patterns, even destructive ones, because predictability feels safer than uncertainty. Every time you return to a familiar source of suffering, be it a thought, a relationship, or a routine, you strengthen the neural pathway. The path becomes a groove, then a canyon. What was once a choice becomes a compulsion. And dopamine plays its part, not just in pleasure, but in anticipation. Your brain rewards you not for healing, but for the pursuit of resolution. You get a hit when you rehash the argument, plan the escape, fantasize about change, but not when you actually change. So you stay in the loop, suffering, strategizing, suffering again. The cycle becomes self-sustaining. This is the hidden problem. You are not addicted to pain itself. You are addicted to the identity pain gives you. to the purpose it provides, to the excuse it offers, to the certainty it brings. You are addicted because, in a world of flux and impermanence, suffering is the one thing you can count on. It is your anchor, your compass, your religion. And to let it go is to face the most terrifying prospect of all, that you might be free, not free despite suffering, free from the need for it, that you might wake up one morning and realize you don't have to earn your existence, that you don't have to bleed to belong, that you don't have to carry the past like a cross. But this freedom is not granted. It is seized. And to seize it, you must first see the invisible chains. You must see how the stories you were told, the ones about sacrifice, endurance, and redemption, have shaped your choices. You must see how your mind, in its desperate attempt to make sense of early wounds, built a life around their echo. You must see how society profits from your exhaustion, how productivity culture, consumerism, and emotional repression all depend on your willingness to suffer in silence. And you must ask the question that has been avoided for years. If I am not the one who suffers, who am I? Because the moment you ask that question, really ask it, in the quiet, without rushing to answer, you crack the foundation of the entire illusion. You begin to glimpse the possibility that meaning does not require martyrdom, that depth does not demand despair, that growth does not depend on grief. And in that glimpse, something stirs. Not hope, not yet, something deeper. A quiet, unshakable knowing. This was never supposed to be your life. The suffering was not the path, it was the detour. And now the real journey begins. But beware. The mind will resist. It will conjure new crises, new reasons to return to the familiar ache. It will whisper that without suffering, you'll become lazy, shallow, irrelevant. It will do anything to avoid the void. But the void is not empty. It is full of everything you've buried. And to walk through it, you must first understand what happens when the addiction takes hold, not just in the soul, but in the world. Because the personal is not separate from the collective. Your suffering is not just yours. It is part of a much larger pattern, one that shapes nations, economies, relationships, and the very way you breathe. You thought the suffering was private, a quiet burden carried in the silence between heartbeats, a personal cross worn in solitude. But suffering is never truly private. It is contagious. It spreads like a slow fever through families, relationships, institutions, and entire civilizations. And the deeper you are addicted to it, the more you transmit it, often without ever raising your voice. Consider the parent who says, "I suffered for you, so you must respect me." The partner who says, "If you really loved me, you'd endure this pain." The boss who says, "We all have to make sacrifices." The nation that glorifies war as noble, loss as heroic, grief as patriotic, these are not isolated statements. They are rituals, echoes of a collective belief that to matter is to hurt. And each time they are repeated, the addiction is reinforced, not just in the speaker, but in the listener. A cycle of emotional debt is created. I suffered, so you must suffer too. Not out of malice, but out of unconscious loyalty to a system that equates pain with value. Now look at the cognitive machinery beneath this transmission. Your brain is wired for pattern recognition, not truth. It seeks consistency, not liberation. So when you grow up in a world where love is conditional on endurance, where attention is given only when you're struggling, where your identity is shaped by trauma, your mind learns suffering equals being seen, and being seen is primal, more essential than comfort, more urgent than joy. Because to be unseen is to be invisible, to be forgotten, to not exist. So you unconsciously recreate the conditions that once made you visible. You become anxious, so your partner will finally pay attention. You overwork, so your parents will finally approve. You fall into depression, so the world will finally understand how deep you are. But the tragedy is this: the attention you receive is not for you. It is for your wound. And the more you bleed, the more you are loved, not as a whole being, but as a problem to be solved, a tragedy to be witnessed, a story to be consumed. This is the unseen consequence. You are not only addicted to suffering, you are rewarded for it. And the brain, ever efficient, learns to crave the reward. Dopamine fires not when you heal, but when you perform your pain, when you post the vulnerable update, when you confess your burnout at the dinner table, when you say, "I'm barely holding it together," and receive a flood of empathy. Compassion feels like connection, but it is often transactional. You give pain, they give attention, and the loop tightens. Now expand this to culture. Look at the media. What stories dominate? The ones of triumph after tragedy. The celebrity who overcomes addiction. The athlete who wins after injury. The survivor who finds strength in loss. All noble. All meaningful. But notice what is missing. The story of quiet peace, of uneventful wholeness, of a life not defined by overcoming, because such a life is deemed uninteresting. No conflict, no arc, no drama. And in a world addicted to narrative, the absence of suffering is seen as the absence of meaning. So culture teaches you, if you aren't struggling, you aren't alive, and you internalize it. You begin to distrust ease. You feel guilty when things go well. You sabotage moments of joy with worry. This can't last. I don't deserve this. Something will go wrong. This is hedonic adaptation twisted into self-punishment. Not just the brain as tendency to return to a baseline of happiness, but an active rejection of happiness, because it feels like betrayal. Betrayal of the past. Betrayal of those who still suffer. Betrayal of the identity you've spent decades building. And so, you unconsciously engineer crisis. You pick fights when harmony settles in. You overcommit when you finally have space. You magnify small problems into existential threats. Because chaos is familiar, and familiarity is safety. Now consider the societal cost. A workforce running on burnout is easier to control. An electorate fueled by fear is easier to manipulate. A population numbed by emotional exhaustion is less likely to question, to rebel, to imagine alternatives. Suffering, in this sense, is not just a personal pathology. It is a political tool, a way to keep people too tired to organize, too guilty to demand more, too focused on survival to envision liberation. Look at the language of modern life. Hustle culture, grind mentality. No pain, no gain. You have to earn it. These are not neutral phrases. They are dogma, religious in their fervor, sacramental in their repetition, and they serve a system that profits from your depletion. Because a depleted person does not rise up. They adapt, they endure, they ask for permission to rest. And when they do rest, they do so with guilt, as if leisure were a sin and peace a form of laziness. This is how the addiction scales, from the individual psyche to the collective unconscious, from the silent tear in the bathroom mirror to the national anthem sung over graves. And the most insidious part? It feels moral. To suffer is to be serious, to be committed, to be real. To seek ease is to be shallow, selfish, weak, so you police yourself, and you police others. You judge the person who leaves their high-paying job to find themselves. You roll your eyes at the one who prioritizes therapy over promotion. You whisper, "They've gone soft," when someone chooses peace over prestige. Because on some level, their freedom threatens you. It exposes the lie you've been living. It proves that another way is possible. And that possibility is terrifying, because it means you chose your chains. But the consequences go deeper still. When you are addicted to suffering, you cannot truly love. Not yourself, not others, because love requires presence. And presence is impossible when you are trapped in the past, reenacting old wounds or chasing future redemption. You are not with your child. You are with your guilt for not being enough. You are not with your partner. You are with your fear of abandonment. You are not with your life. You are with your narrative about how hard it's been. And so, relationships become theaters of reenactment. You attract people who mirror your pain. You push away those who offer peace, mistaking their stability for indifference. You confuse intensity for intimacy. A screaming match feels more real than a quiet walk in the park. A crisis feels more meaningful than a moment of laughter. And when someone tries to pull you out of the storm, you resist, because the storm is home. Now consider the spiritual cost. Many of the world's wisdom traditions speak of liberation, of enlightenment, union, grace, awakening. But you have turned even these into goals to be struggled toward. You meditate to fix yourself. You pray to earn salvation. You seek truth as if it were a prize at the end of a marathon. But what if liberation is not something you achieve, but something you stop preventing? What if peace is not the reward for suffering, but the ground beneath it? This is the unseen consequence of the addiction. You have forgotten how to receive. You no longer know how to accept joy without suspicion, love without testing, rest without guilt, presence without agenda. You have become allergic to wholeness. And so, you remain trapped, not because you are broken, but because you believe you must be. The irony is unbearable. The very thing you think gives you depth, your suffering, is what keeps you shallow. Because it keeps you stuck in the wound, unable to see the vastness beyond it. You are not avoiding pain. You are avoiding freedom. And in doing so, you perpetuate a cycle that extends far beyond you. But now, after all this, after the pattern seen, the chains exposed, the consequences laid bare, a new question emerges, not as a thought, but as a tremor in the bones. What if you stopped? Not someday, not when the time is right, not after one more achievement, one more apology, one more act of endurance, but now. What if, in this moment, you chose not to suffer less, but to stop justifying it? What if you stopped using pain as proof of your worth? What if you allowed yourself to be seen not for your wounds, but for your presence? What if you dared to believe that you are already whole, not in spite of your past, but including it? This is not optimism. It is not denial. It is not naive. It is rebellion. Because to stop feeding the addiction is to withdraw consent from a system that depends on your exhaustion. And when you do, something shifts. Not immediately, not dramatically, but fundamentally. The world begins to whisper a different story. One where peace is not earned, where love is not a reward, where existence is not a debt. And in that whisper, the first breath of true freedom stirs. But knowing this is not enough. Understanding is not liberation. Insight is not action. To break free, you must do more than see the trap. You must move, not toward a new illusion, but away from the old one. And that requires a rebellion unlike any other, not against the world, but against the mind's deepest loyalty. You have seen the chains. You have traced their roots through psyche, culture, and time. You have felt their weight in your breath, your choices, your silence. Now comes the most dangerous moment of all, the decision to stop pulling the rope. Not because you've found a better path, not because the pain has vanished, but because you finally understand. You are not freeing yourself from suffering. You are freeing yourself of the need for it. This is not self-improvement. It is self-unbecoming. A quiet dismantling of the identity built on endurance, on struggle, on the sacredness of the wound. And the first act of rebellion is this: stop interpreting your pain as meaningful, not because it isn't real, not because it doesn't matter, but because the moment you declare suffering necessary, you give it permission to stay. Watch what happens when you stop narrating your pain. When you refuse to say, "This is making me stronger." When you no longer whisper, "I must learn from this." When you let the ache exist without elevating it, without justifying it, without turning it into a lesson, something shifts. The pain doesn't disappear, but it loses its halo. It is no longer a teacher, no longer a badge, no longer the center of your story. It becomes what it always was, a sensation, a signal, a passing weather pattern in the vast sky of being. And in that neutrality, space opens. Space to ask, what if I don't have to extract meaning from every wound? What if healing doesn't require understanding? What if I can simply stop feeding it? This is the radical act. Withdraw your devotion. Because addiction is not just about craving, it's about worship. You have been worshiping suffering as if it holds the keys to truth, depth, authenticity. You have bowed before it in silence, in overwork, in self-criticism, in relationships that drain you. You have offered it your time, your energy, your life as sacrifice. Now stop. Stop lighting candles at the altar of your own exhaustion. Stop praying to the God of someday. Stop believing that the future will reward what the present demands. The future is a mirage built on the currency of your suffering. And the only way out is to declare that currency invalid. How? Begin with the smallest, most devastating act. Do nothing. When the old ache rises, the familiar tension in the chest, the loop of self-attack, the urge to fix, to flee, to punish, do not move. Do not reach for distraction. Do not spiral into analysis. Do not call a friend to rehash the wound. Just let it be. And in that stillness, something extraordinary happens. The pain realizes it is no longer in charge. It flickers. It rages. It tries to bargain. If you let me in, I'll tell you the truth. If you suffer, you'll finally understand. If you endure, you'll be worthy. But you stay. You breathe. You do not engage. And slowly, the storm loses its power. Because pain does not thrive on sensation. It thrives on attention. Like a child screaming for recognition, it grows louder the more you respond. But the moment you stop feeding it, it begins to starve. This is not suppression. This is disengagement. It is the refusal to participate in the old drama, the silent rebellion of presence. Now, rebuild from there. Begin to notice the moments when you invite suffering. When you choose the stressful project over the peaceful one, when you dwell on the criticism instead of the praise, when you rehearse future failures instead of allowing the present to exist. Each time, pause. Ask, who benefits from this? And more importantly, who am I being when I do this? You will find again and again that the answer is the one who suffers, the one who endures, the one who is deep. And then, for the first time, you can choose differently. You can choose the task that brings flow, not fatigue. You can walk away from the conversation that drains you. You can sit with joy without twisting it into anxiety. And when guilt arises because it will do not fight it, acknowledge it, let it speak. Then ask, is this guilt protecting me? Or is it protecting the addiction? More often than not, it is the voice of the old script screaming, you're abandoning your duty, you're becoming lazy, you're betraying your past. But you are not betraying your past. You are honoring it by refusing to let it dictate your future. Now reclaim your attention. Attention is the most sacred resource you possess. Every moment you spend ruminating on pain is a moment stolen from life. Every second you give to self-attack is a theft from your own presence. So begin to redirect. Not with force, not with willpower, but with curiosity. When the mind drifts to suffering, gently ask, what else is here? The warmth of sunlight on your skin, the sound of breath entering and leaving, the quiet hum of existence, untouched by story. These are not distractions. They are revelations, because joy is not the opposite of suffering. It is its forgotten counterpart. And the more you attend to it not as a goal, but as a fact, the more the balance shifts. History is filled with those who broke free. Nietzsche, who wrote of the Bermensch not as one who suffers more, but as one who creates values beyond good and evil, beyond the morality of endurance. Rumi, who danced in ecstasy, not despite pain, but because he had stopped mistaking it for truth. Buddha, who did not seek enlightenment through suffering, but through letting go of the craving that fuels it. They did not conquer pain. They transcended the need to suffer for meaning. And so can you. But the rebellion is not a single act. It is a daily return. A moment-by-moment choice to stop feeding the old story. Some days you will fail. You will fall back into the familiar ache. You will justify the struggle. You will believe again that pain is proof of depth, and that is not failure. That is practice. Because every time you catch yourself, every time you pause and say, I don't have to do this, you weaken the neural pathway. You disrupt the pattern. You reclaim a fragment of your life. And one day, without fanfare, you will realize you are no longer waiting for peace. You are no longer earning love. You are no longer proving your worth through endurance. You are simply here. And in that simplicity, the most radical truth emerges, not as a thought, but as a lived reality. You are never broken. You were only convinced you had to suffer to be whole. But the truth is the other way around. Wholeness is not the destination. It is the starting point. And the rebellion was never about becoming free. It was about remembering you already are. Now, all that remains is to live as if you believe it. But belief is not enough. There is one final realization so deep, so shattering, it rewrites everything that came before. One truth that, once seen, cannot be unseen. One insight that dissolves the very foundation of the illusion. And when you hear it, you will feel the ground vanish beneath you. Because it is not about how to stop suffering. It is about why you thought you needed it in the first place. There is a moment rare, silent, unannounced when the mind stops reaching. When the heart ceases its frantic search for meaning. When the body, for the first time in decades, does not tense against the present. In that moment, something arrives. Not as a thought, not as an emotion, but as a knowing so deep, so complete, it feels less like discovery and more like remembering. And what you remember is this. You were never meant to suffer to be worthy. You are worthy always simply because you are. Not because you endured, not because you sacrificed, not because you proved yourself through pain, but because existence itself is sacred, and you are part of it. This is the final truth, the one that shatters every illusion, every justification, every chain. Not that suffering is meaningless, not that it doesn't teach, but that you do not need it to be whole. Wholeness was never something to be earned. It was something to be uncovered, buried beneath layers of conditioning, fear, and mistaken identity, but never lost. And the addiction to suffering? It was never about the pain. It was about separation. The moment you were born into this world, you were severed from the womb, from unity, from the seamless flow of being. And in that severance, a wound formed. I am not enough. I must become. I must earn. I must prove. So you built a self, a personality, a story, an identity around that wound. And suffering became its foundation. Because as long as you were fighting, striving, enduring, you had a reason to exist, a role, a purpose, a way to feel real. But the deeper truth is this: the wound was never yours. It was a misinterpretation of separation. You mistook the condition of form for the condition of being. You confused the fragility of the body, the impermanence of life, the inevitability of loss with a flaw in your essence. And so, you spent your life trying to fix what was never broken. Now, feel the weight of that realization. Every tear you shed in the dark, Every night you lay awake, punishing yourself for not being better. Every relationship you stayed in because you believed love required sacrifice. Every dream you abandoned because you thought you didn't deserve it. It was all based on a lie. Not a malicious lie. Not a conspiracy. But a mistake as simple and profound as mistaking a shadow for a monster. You thought suffering was the path to truth, but it was the obstacle. Because suffering, when clung to, when worshipped, when used as proof of depth, blinds you. It narrows your vision to the wound. It makes you forget the vastness around it. It convinces you that the crack is the hole. But the crack is not the truth. It is a fracture in perception. And the light you've been seeking? It was never on the other side of pain. It was behind your eyes all along. This is the ultimate rebellion. To stop seeing yourself as a project to be fixed. To stop treating life as a debt to be repaid. To stop believing that you must suffer to be loved. Because love is not a reward. It is the ground, the air, the silence between thoughts. And the moment you stop demanding proof of it, you begin to feel it, not as emotion, not as validation, but as presence. The presence that was there when you were 5, laughing in the grass without knowing why. The presence that lingered after your first heartbreak, when you sat alone and somehow, inexplicably, felt okay. The presence that visits in the stillness before sleep, when the mind finally quiets and you are simply here. That presence is not temporary. It is not conditional. It is not earned. It is you, not the personality, not the story, not the one who suffered, but the one who witnesses it all. The silent awareness beneath the noise. The unchanging space in which every emotion, every thought, every experience arises and passes. And in that awareness, there is no addiction, no need, no lack, only peace. Not peace after struggle, not peace despite pain, but peace as the default state of being. And the suffering? It does not vanish. Life still brings loss. The body still aches. The world still breaks hearts. But now it is seen for what it is, a ripple on the surface of an infinite ocean. You no longer confuse the wave with the water. You no longer let the storm define the sky. And in that clarity, you are free. Not free from suffering, free within it. Free to feel pain without becoming it. Free to grieve without losing yourself. Free to live not as a battle, but as a breath. This is not enlightenment. It is homecoming. And the most astonishing part? Nothing changes, and everything does. You still wake up in the same bed. The same light still slips through the blinds. The same body still carries its scars. But now, when you look in the mirror, you do not search for the wound. You meet your own eyes, and for the first time, you recognize the one staring back. Not the victim, not the survivor, not the one who endured, but the one who is. And in that gaze, the final illusion dissolves. You were never addicted to suffering. You were in love with the truth, and you mistook pain for its voice. Now you hear it in silence, in stillness, in the quiet courage of simply being here. So the question is no longer, why do I suffer? It is, what if I stopped using suffering as proof that I'm alive? And the answer? You already are. Not because you fought, not because you bled, not because you earned it, but because the universe breathed you into existence, and in that breath gave you everything you will ever need. Now, the only task left is to live as if you believe it, not perfectly, not forever, but in moments, in the pause between thoughts, in the breath after the storm, in the courage to say, I don't have to suffer to be real. And when the old voice returns, whispering that you must earn your place, that peace is complacency, that depth requires despair, you will not fight it.